Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anne Isabel. And I am delighted because today I have with me Anne Whitaker, who is a fellow astrologer. Hello, Anne.
Hello, Anna, and hello, everybody. And as you can see, I'm keeping my hands warm because it's very cold everywhere.
It is indeed. And I think, well, tales to warm the heart are the thing we need at this time of year. And I would say that a great book for that is yours, From the Dazzling Darkness. And I think I'm just going to let you about that.
Right. I thought I would start this by reading the quote on consciousness. My book is called Wisps from the Dazzling Darkness. And the dazzling darkness is a lovely phrase because it carries, I mean, I'm very Jungian in the sense that I really do believe that our task in this life is to reconcile the opposites. And the two great opposites are light and dark. And we need them both. There is no point in trying to go too much towards the light because the shadow always follows us. And this book is about what rises up into the light of one's consciousness when one doesn't particularly want it to. So this book I wrote was about making peace with these experiences, which undoubtedly came my way as a serious skeptical, in the best sense of the word, the open-minded sense of the word, rationalist. It takes a lot to convince me. But one of the books I read in preparing for and reflecting on the book Anna and I are talking about was one of my favorite books ever, William James's Varieties of Religious Experience, which I was saying to Anna is about the only book I've ever read 4 times. It's a tome, but his use of the English language is just wonderful. So at the end of his descriptions of all these people's experiences, I wonder, is he going to nail his colors to the mast and say what he really thinks? And he did. And it's a very short quote, so I'm going to read it to you. It's William James. The whole drift of my education goes to persuade me that the world of our present consciousness is only one out of many worlds of consciousness that exist, and that these other worlds must contain experiences which have a meaning for our life also. And that, although in the main, their experiences and those of this world keep discrete, i.e. separate, yet the two become continuous at certain points. The total expression of human experience, as I view it objectively, invincibly urges me beyond the normal scientific bounds.
Well, you can't say better than that.
That's a terrific quote. And here I'll just give you a quick one from Max Planck on scientific truth. Max Planck was a Nobel Prize winning German physicist, and he said, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because their opponents eventually die." That's not missing and hitting the ball, that one.
No, it's certainly. So tell us what prompted you to write this.
Well, one can have as many prompts as one likes, but one needs the space to respond to them. And in 2001, 2002, I was given the space. I didn't want the space because it involved me at the beginning of menopause, my husband and I having given sanctuary to a member of our family with a severe mental breakdown, and me working very hard, traveling up and down to London, studying with the Centre for Psychological Astrology as I was at the time, and doing some teaching for them. The stress of dealing with this situation burnt me out. And I collapsed. I literally collapsed. I had to quit all work at the end of 2001. And I didn't actually go back to any form of work until I went on the web in 2007, 2008. So it took me 7 years to recover. And I didn't actually go back to work until 2012. So I had a whole Jupiter cycle of catching up on all the reading I hadn't been able to do for 30 years, And my energy was so low that I could barely get down the 3 floors of our tenement and back up again. So my husband Ian said to me, why don't you just lie on the sofa and write out all these weird experiences you've been telling me about that you've been having over the last 30 years? And I thought, well, why not? They're all still in there. They refused resolutely to go away, every single one of them. Although, believe me, I tried, because I really am of the view, which I suspect you share with me, Anna, that this life is quite complicated enough to deal with without looking for other levels of reality to relate to as well. So, and also, you know, one of Jung's dicta, I should use the correct version of the word, was, if the unconscious doesn't come looking for you, don't you go looking for it. So I'm quite cautious about crossing certain boundaries. But when Ian said this, and I should say for the astrologers who are listening, that I was at the beginning of a 10-year Neptune transit from my 6th house to 6 12th house planets, square Uranus.
So for those who are not familiar with astrology, Neptune, when it comes knocking on our door, brings a huge bag that would make Santa look tiny, of all kinds of mystical questions and experiences,
Yep.
which is indeed what this book is all about.
Mm-hmm.
So
to just to respond to your question with a huge long answer, let's cut it short. I had the opportunity, and the objective of the exercise became for me to make peace with a whole dimension of myself that I was very uncomfortable with. My rationalist self was very uncomfortable with those intermittent episodes that appeared from other levels of reality.
And I think one of the things I enjoyed is the way that you actually organize the book, and you organize it into different types of experiences. So I think perhaps before we talk about that, tell us about your grandmother, because I think she actually is an important influence in this respect.
You are absolutely right. This is my great grandmother, Mary Ann McLean, who lived her life in an obscure village way on the Atlantic coast of the island of Lewis. And Mary Ann, who died she lived a long life. She lived to over 90. She was known for having what's known in the Highlands as the second sight, which is the ability to receive information from levels which are other than the ordinary materialist level that we live our lives on. And a story about Mary Ann. She was lying in her deathbed, and this was late 1940s, just after the war, I think, the Second World War. And she lay there. Now, bear in mind, this is a remote village perched on the edge of the Atlantic, you know, next stop, the Statue of Liberty, basically. Nobody ever came there. And it was wild and fierce. And there was this headland called Gallen Head, which was really storm battered. And she said, I hear the rumble of heavy lorries coming through this village, and what they bring will alter our lives completely. And people wondered what on earth she was on about. And about 6 or 7 years later, the RAF had decided to build an observation station on Gallen Head because it was so remote and it was in such a appropriate spot. So the lorries duly started rumbling through the village, and an RAF station was built on Gallen Head with housing for the personnel. And I remember as a little girl going up to the camp shop, the NAFI shop, and buying sweeties. This was in the very early 1950s. So my great-grandmother was delivered a piece of that information many years before it actually happened. So.
And that these are things which, it doesn't matter how much we want to be.
Your sound is fading out, Anna. I don't know. It was fading out a bit.
Okay, thank you. These are experiences which cannot be explained but it doesn't take away from the fact that they happen. And that's the point, is that life is such that not everything can be replicated in a lab and conveniently explained and conveniently proven to satisfy those who are of a materialist view. And the fact of the matter is that these experiences are incredibly common.
That is one of the reasons as well why I wrote the book. It wasn't just to make peace for my benefit. It was because I thought, here I am, I'm at a stage in life where I can straightforwardly talk publicly about these things. And it was to help other people who have had these experiences feel less weird and less alone, because they are very common. And what you say about not being able to replicate them in materialist laboratories is absolutely spot on. Because one of the things I say in the conclusion of the book, I don't know if you remember this bit, was that there's a kind of will-o'-the-wisp resistant quality to that dimension. It does not respond to us trying to make it cooperate.
No.
It has its own agenda. We don't know what it is, and it is not controllable by rational means.
I would also say that this is part of nature. It's natural.
Yes.
And so no more than we can control nature can we make demands upon this. What we can do, and what many people learn to do, is connect with it and work with it.
Yes.
In the same way that we might be able to work with the seasons and the weather, because there's something here that's natural. And what makes it natural is the fact that we are more than the bodies in which we operate. There's that spark of life, that energy that is there. And it's that energy that can connect with other energy. So this is a beautiful account of your experiences. And as I said earlier, I like the way that you organize it into categories of experiences. And there are many. So one of my favorites is the way that it was predicted that you would be an astrologer.
Shall I tell a bit of the story?
Yes.
Okay, well, cast your imaginative minds back to the early 1970s, a wet night, a rainy night, and me carting my washing into a laundrette in Bath on the London Road. I was living there and I was planning on departing to the Outer Hebrides to be a writer. I had a lecturing job in a college near Bath. And in came these rather strange looking people. And the woman was tall and quite scruffy, wearing an Afghan jacket, long dark hair. She really looked like Cher of Sonny and Cher. And with the partner, the wee guy, he was smaller than her, with a very mischievous face and rumpled hair and just generally untidy looking. And they had this delightful little girl of about 5. She and I made friends, and I got her to put the money in my machine, blah, blah. We had a great chat. And at the end of it, they said, oh, would you like to come and have a cup of tea with us? We're astrologers and we're artists. And I went, oh, no, because at that time, I fancied myself as a young Marxist. You know, I really thought I was a Marxist. I hadn't read much Marx, but in your 20s, that doesn't stop you from aspiring to all kinds of things. So off we went. And I thought, well, I'd better be polite and go and have a cup of tea. But I just did not believe at all. I thought astrology was a load of rubbish, you know, from the usual standpoint of not knowing anything about it apart from the sun sign stuff, but nevertheless being prepared to dismiss a 6,000-year tradition and study as rubbish. That's the position I was in. And then this guy whose name was, I better not use his name, I think he's probably dead by now, but let's call him Seamus. Seamus and his partner drew up a chart for me, which I still have. They had all these books and they were, and they went, oh, this is interesting. All this 12th house stuff. And of course, I hadn't a clue what they were talking about. But Seamus sat me down and he said, look, you are approaching your Saturn return, because I was heading for 30. And whether you like it or not, you have a deeply spiritual side. And if you don't do something with that, you will remain restless and dissatisfied like your father. And I was sitting there going, and then he proceeded to put all the characters on my stage. You know what happens, we're astrologers. Gave me an incredibly accurate, in-depth description of me and my character and preoccupations, including all the bits we all try to hide from the world. He pulled them all to the front of the stage and went, there they are. And then the coup de resistance was, he said, I don't care how skeptical you are in the dismissive sense of the word, he said, but about 7 years from now, you're going to end up doing either this or something very like it. And lo and behold, as I staggered out of his place with my washing, thinking, what do I do with this bit of information that's bouncing around that won't fit any of the categories in my head? Well, I just sort of gradually forgot about it. And 7 years later, a friend who I respected gave me a copy of Alan Oken's The Horoscope of the Road and Its Travellers. And I thought, oh, I'd better read this. Started reading it, and it was as though somebody reached out from the book and pulled me in. And that
I love that politeness led you to having a cup of tea with them. And I politeness led you to reading the book that your friend gave you.
Nobody's ever complimented me on my politeness before. Thank you, Anna. I can be very impolite when I choose to be, you know.
Well, like that would be right for most of us, I think.
Yeah, that's true. I'm much more polite now than I was in my 20s, I have to say, which would probably apply to most of us as well.
I think so.
So
But
that's the story.
I'm also smiling because I don't know how many people I've done readings for with charts similar to yours, where there is this very strong spiritual, mystical aspect emphasized in the chart. And they kind of go, yeah, it's not really what I want to do. And I can see they're not going to be happy until they discover that.
Exactly.
And then maybe a few years down the road, I'll bump into them, or they'll come and see me again.
Mm-hmm.
And out comes the story, and they're so happy because you found homeopathy or acupuncture or or it doesn't matter what it is, but it's definitely not material and not mainstream. When I say material in perspective. So it's a very interesting thing. And that's I guess that story just says it all. And yes, prediction is one of those things, you know, your grand prediction, you as an astrologer, I as an astrologer. And perhaps as astrologers, we can say, yes, but we're reading patterns here. But it doesn't take away from the magic of the fact that as above, so below. We can say, oh, make this prediction because it's based on a pattern that we know is going to happen in 5 years' time. We can look ahead from using our astronomical knowledge and plot where the planets are going to be. Yes. But the magic is in the fact that we can do this at all, that those patterns have meaning.
Well, quite. And I mean, as an astrologer, as I'm sure you are, I am very, very wary of the predictive dimension of the whole thing. Because as far as I'm concerned, we can see these archetypal patterns writ large in our clients' horoscopes, and we can describe the essence of each archetype. But each archetype has an inexhaustible range of branches that all come back to the same core. So we responsible astrologers are very cautious in saying, well, this is the essence. I'll describe the essence to you, but it could manifest this way, that way, or the next way. And I'm really very wary about prediction, apart from, you know, in the sort of sense that we mostly use it. But if anyone cares to listen to my YouTube channel, the leading piece is on my thoughts on prediction, because I reflect on that for quite a while. And at the end, I tell the story I've just told you, and I said that prediction has a very long and very tortuous and very questionable history. But there are times when people will just come out and they will say something that is absolutely accurate.
So yes, indeed, prediction is a tricky business.
Yes.
And we can get into the whole realm of self-fulfilling prophecies, etc., etc. However, your grandmother's prediction, for instance, there is no self-fulfilling prophecy there.
No.
We can't take away from that. And I have had dreams that are very bizarre, in the fact that they come true, and they're like little random snippets, like the occasion where I dreamt that I was in London and I was taking the tube, and somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, you're Anna Isabel." And the very next day, I was on my way to the College of Psychic Studies on the Underground, and a client who I had not met because I'd only ever done telephone readings for her, walked up to me and said, "Oh, you're Anna Isabel," just like in the dream. And that's truly quite bizarre, but very common, it seems. This happens.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So this is the stuff of prediction.
Could I just put in, while I remember, a quote from Einstein here, because I've read a lot of science, as I suspect you probably have as well, in order to try and make some sort of connection between, for example, quantum physics and the kind of symbolic energies that we're working with, because essentially I think it's the same field, but we're looking at it through different lenses. But anyway, he said, past, present, and future all occur at the same time. To see them as separate is an illusion. That's the gist of what he said. And I really do think, I mean, for example, the Aberfan disaster, where about 150 children were killed by a coal slurry mountain that collapsed in Wales in the 1960s, I think it was. It's very well documented that there were loads and loads of people who had predictive dreams about that disaster before it happened. And no matter how uncomfortable materialist and reductionist science gets about this stuff happens to people.
It does.
There are other levels, as William James said, there are other levels that cross ours. It's as though if you think of our level of existence as being a flat plane, every so often there's a cross and there's a meeting. And at another place in the Varieties of Religious Experience, William James says that when these levels intersect, energies flow down, which are usually beneficial to us in some way or another. And I really believe that from my own experience. And I'm very, very hard to convince. I really am hard to convince.
Well,
but I believe it.
The other thing that I loved reading your book was the stories around sensing atmospheres, when you can sense something. Tell us about that.
I'm trying to think. Shall I read you a bit?
Yes, that would be good.
Because there are two particular. Maybe I should read out to the listeners the list of. I mean, I've marked a couple of things here. Let's just see if I can quickly find things. This, incidentally, is a print of the ebook version. I'm hoping to perhaps produce a print version next year sometime. The list is part 1, atmospheres, part 2, dreams, part 3, ghosts, part 4, grief, personal and collective, part 5, mediumship, part 6, mystical experience, part 7, poltergeists, part 8, prediction, that's the extract we've just been talking about, part 9, premonitions, which we've talked about, part 10, reincarnation experiences, part 11, telepathy. So there's this whole range of 37 experiences that I've had on and off. And this covers a period of 30 years from my age 23. And then they sort of stopped, but I still occasionally have something come in, although I don't look for it. So atmospheres, let's just see. There's a lovely quote here from Yeats. One often hears of a horse that shivers with terror, or of a dog that howls at something a man's eyes cannot see. And men who live primitive lives where instinct does the work of reason are fully conscious of many things that we cannot perceive at all. As life becomes more orderly, more deliberate, the supernatural world sinks farther away. And I think that's wonderfully put. I really do. So I have several here, but I think possibly the most interesting one might be Orkney. Has anyone who's listening ever been to Orkney? Because the Orkney Islands, in fact, I'll just read what I've written. It's quite short. It doesn't take me long to read it. This was a visit to Mid-Howe Cairn, Rousey in the Orkney Islands of Scotland on July the 19th, 1998. My husband was an inveterate diarist and he used to keep notes, which were very useful to me when I was writing this book. Okay. We were visiting the Orkney Isles, a scattering of more than 70 wonderfully green windswept islands located between the far north of Scotland and the Shetland Isles. We were regular visitors there. An elderly local amateur historian, full of vigor, enthusiasm, and detailed local knowledge, had once memorably observed to me, "Scratch Orkney and it bleeds archaeology." What a wonderful statement. How right he was. Ian and I had taken a ferry over for the afternoon to the island of Rousey, one of the 20 inhabited islands, where along the shoreline runs what is known as the Archaeological Mile. Anna, you would love this place. You should go. I'll take you. We'll go next year.
I love that.
More historical sites to visit in a mile than anywhere else in Scotland. We had a particular location in mind, an ancient burial chamber in a remarkable state of preservation, right by the seashore. It is thought to date from around 3,500 years BC and is the largest known of its kind. As we drew near, we saw what can best be described as a large modern shed with clear corrugated plastic in the roof to let in the light. This protective structure had been built over the tomb, which was massive, 23 meters long, about 10 meters wide, divided by upright flagstones into a series of 12 stalls, each containing a stone bench on which bodies had been laid. Inside the structure, known atmospherically as the Ship of Death, was so large that you could walk along narrow passageways with burial areas on either side. Following the beginning of its excavation in 1932, 25 sets of human remains were found, as well as those of cattle, sheep, deer antlers, fish bones, and limpet shells. These days, visitors can also look down into the chamber's interior using wooden raised walkways built into the modern protective shell. With much smaller tombs, to gain access, you have to crawl along narrow passages, evocative of the birth canal, usually in the dark, claustrophobic to say the least. On the day we visited, perhaps because the weather in Orkney is frequently wet and cold, even in summer, there was no one there but ourselves. The atmosphere of this ancient place was silent and distinctively oppressive. I became very uncomfortably aware, almost as though someone was reminding me that the dead would have been laid to rest here with great ceremony, power, and funereal dignity. They were meant to rest in peace and silence for eternity. This was sacred space, sacred time. We were barbarians, wreckers, invaders. We were not welcome. We did not stay long. And as we're reading this, I'm getting shivers up and down my back. Comparing notes outside, we discovered we had both had a similar impression of the spirit of the place telling us clearly that we were secular trespassers in a sacred place and that we should get out. Ian's diary for the visit records it as, quote, still, watchful, and ancient. In essence, our experience there was remarkably like what had happened in the early medieval Italian crypt over a decade earlier. which I've described also in this book. So, I mean, the really interesting thing about all the experiences in there is, having put them in a book and put them out and put them to bed, as it were, they're still absolutely crystal clear in my mind.
What I like is the number of times in which you experience something, and as it turns out, your husband also does. And it puts me in mind of several things that have happened with me and my partner. One of the most vivid ones in my memory, and it was your story about the cyclist that
Oh, yes, the ghost
cyclist, that made me think about this, because we were heading out towards Box Hill in Surrey, and we saw a man who looked like he had his arm out with a lead for a dog. And we were looking for the dog, and Steve, my partner, stopped the car to let them cross, and the man just disappeared. And I looked at him and I said, "You stopped the car?" He said, "Well, there was a man with a dog, although I couldn't see the dog." We both saw him.
Yes.
We both saw him. Now, we have no idea whether a man was run down there or whether this was the ghost of a man who this was his daily walk. We have no idea.
But you saw him.
Is that he was there and he wasn't. And it was not our imaginations. We both saw it.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, there, you know, as you've observed, there are several things in there where Ian has been an observer of. I mean, he got used to the fact eventually that these things happened to me, but he undoubtedly had his own sense. My husband died nearly 3 years ago, and, you know, I miss him terribly, but I was so grateful to have had him as my partner, because he was so supportive to everything I did. I mean, he was an Aquarian with a lot of Capricorn, so a very grounded, a lovely mixture of slightly off the wall, unpredictable occasional madness and solid, reliable common sense. Just what I like in a friend or a partner, actually. And he was very supportive, but he also was very open-minded and sensitive.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing, is that when we are open-minded, we can't ignore our experiences.
No. Well, we can't. No, sorry, I beg your pardon. We can ignore our experiences, but if we're open-minded, of course we can't.
That's right. And that's the thing, because a lot of people shut down. I get asked a lot, and many of my guests, we touch on this, where people ask, how can I develop? How can I become more? And number one, listen, pay attention. Number two, don't dismiss it. Entertain it as a possibility. And then what you find is that when you do entertain it as a possibility, somehow it gets echoed somewhere.
I agree with you.
How?
And in ancient times, of course, people were much more receptive to these different layers. And there's all sorts of stuff in the Bible about prophets having had dreams and all kinds of amazing things. And, you know, in shamanistic cultures, people relied on those levels to guide them. And shamans were people who went through very difficult training in order to be able to reach out and to bring back knowledge and understanding, which was for the benefit of the group. And that was regarded as absolutely normal. But that's why I like that quote from Yeats. You know, the more, basically, I can't remember the exact details of it, the more modern we become, the more that dimension slinks and dies away. And if people are receptive, then these energies come and visit us. And quite often when we don't really want them to. I mean, I can't think of any of the experiences in that book that I would have chosen to have. And they choose their own agenda anyway. It's not up to us, because there's a section on mediumship, and you'll have read that, and that's, I don't want to talk about it in any great detail, but sufficeth it to say that over the years I've been told, oh, you'd make a great medium, you should train, and I've always said, no, I really don't want to get involved with that. But there are two stories in there where I was made to be a very reluctant medium. I didn't want it. And the first time I pushed the person away, but the second time I actually reluctantly gave in and passed on the message that I was supposed to pass on, and was absolutely astounded by this message and by how the person I gave it to verified it, because I didn't think it was possible. But, but I wouldn't seek to engage with that level, because I'm sure you've come across quite a few people who are clairvoyants and who work in that way. And I think it really takes it out of them in terms of their lives. I really do think that many of the ones I've encountered have had very difficult, quite chaotic lives. I think because the boundary between their lives and the other world, however we may wish to characterize it, is very porous, and they don't quite know how to keep it shut down when they need to
That
shut down.
Because if you are let's say a professional medium, you learn to do. You learn how to shut it off.
Yes.
And how to turn it on. And of course, there are going to be times where things happen, whether you think you've shut yourself down or not. But that tends to be for, like for urgent reasons. It's not a random thing. It's like somebody, tapping you on the shoulder going, hello, need to talk to you.
I exactly had that with the second person who nagged me for days before I finally gave in and passed on the message.
Exactly. And, why wouldn't they nag when they can see that you are a good conduit and they are desperately trying to get a message to someone?
Yeah.
If you needed a phone really, really badly and you didn't have one, and there was somebody standing on the corner holding their mobile phone, what would you do?
Well, I would certainly tap them on the shoulder and ask them.
Exactly. And I mean, that's happened to me in a car park, I think a few years back. A lady was stranded. She had her phone in her car and couldn't get into her car. And all she wanted was help, to call for help. So why would I not do that for her?
Quite.
And this is the point. So mediums, professional mediums, know how to switch themselves off. But I know that there are going to be times when there is someone in spirit who is going to be nudging them and nagging them and saying, look, this is really important. Please listen to. And I think, again, these things are natural, because what we're talking about is relationships. It's just that these are being conducted, let's call it, through an interdimensional means of communication. And they rely on a third party being willing to be there, because that's what mediums are. They are messengers. We don't have a mobile phone yet to the other side, although I know that there is such a phone being worked on.
Really?
Oh, yes. And I'm just trying to remember the gentleman's name. He's a scientist, well known. His name's just not coming to me, but he is working on this. And he has done amazing work to demonstrate energy coming through, and tested mediums of in all kinds of different ways. So this is very interesting. What does he call it? Does he call it the psychic phone? I forget what it's called now.
Sounds fascinating. Well, if you send me the details later, because I'd be very interested in looking at this.
And if I find this,
send me
the details as well for this interview. this is the thing, is that we have become, because we have become as a culture disconnected from this aspect of ourselves.
Yes.
We've become afraid of it when we encounter it.
Mm-hmm.
But if we regard it as a natural part of ourselves, which we can learn about, reconnect with, and know how to use, the fear goes away. Happens is that it becomes a very enriching experience.
Well, I've got to that stage, and I think the reason that I have is because I wrote that book partly for my own benefit, but also, you know, for other people's benefit. And that's one of the reasons why I think I should maybe try and get it into a print copy and, you know, distribute it more widely. But I gradually, as these experiences were happening, I gradually thought, I need to make peace with this level. And I remember very clearly my lovely stepdaughter, who I'm very close to, when she was a little girl, she and her friend, in fact, I think that story is in there. She and her friend were sleeping in this room, which used to be half my workroom and half my stepdaughter's bedroom, because she liked this space. And there was a desk over there, and the girls woke up during the night and saw a young man with dark hair sitting at the desk. And they just stared and stared and stared until eventually he disappeared. And they were very quiet at breakfast time. And I said, what's wrong with you girls? And they were very hesitant to tell me, but eventually they did. And I said, look, I am very open-minded to this kind of thing. I do believe that that's what you saw, because occasionally in this house, I'd seen out of the corner of my eye, this dark-haired person disappearing through the wall. And then there was several other manifestations. There was a whole series of things around the same time. And eventually what I did was I stood in my hall, because we live in a big flat. I stood in the hall and I put my arms out and I said, look, I don't know who it is who's here, but as long as you have no negative intentions towards me or my family or our friends, you are welcome to be here. And I just did that when I was all on my own. There was no one else in the house. And that was it. Stopped.
I love it. Well, the book that we are discussing is called Wisps from the Dazzling Darkness. And I shall be putting a link to this at the moment, ebook, but I'll be putting a link to how people can get hold of it. It is a fantastic read.
Thank you.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think for those who are interested or those who are just discovering, this is perfect. So, Anne, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your thoughts about it all with us.
You are most welcome, Anna, and thank you so much for inviting me back again. My goodness, I must have been well behaved the first couple of times for you to ask me back a third time.
Oh,
a pleasure.
What fun. So Anne is referring to interviews she's done for the sister podcast, which is called Lightways at Life Astrologer. So if you are interested in astrology, I'll also be putting a link to her interviews in the description box there, so you can find out more about Anne's astrological work. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.
Bye, everybody.